All right, excellent. So let's get started. I'm eager to talk to you. I'm with Ian Witten of the University of Waikato to talk about the Weka data mining MOOCs. So Ian, can you tell me first of all just a brief little bit about your background?
Sure thing. So my accent is from Northern Ireland, which is where I was brought up. And I went to university at Cambridge in England, and then I went to Canada, and then I came back to England, then I went to Canada, University of Calgary. I used to be head of computer science, University of Calgary in Western Canada. And then 22 years ago, I moved to New Zealand. It's like moving to heaven, really, moving to New Zealand. You know, it's a fantastic place. And I'm stuck here now. It's just too nice to leave.
Great. And can you tell me a little bit about Weka? I'm not very familiar with it.
Yeah, sure.
How did it get started, and who developed it?
So when I arrived here in New Zealand, I thought it'd be good to do some locally relevant research. So we started a large-ish project, large in New Zealand terms anyway, on data mining in agriculture, agricultural applications of, well, machine learning is what we called it in those days. There's a lot of agriculture around here, you know, we're pretty good at it in New Zealand. And I had a background in kind of, well, sort of machine learning and various data compression, things like that. So we started a project on data mining in agriculture, and that grew into the Weka project. We produced a workbench, which we called Weka. Weka is a little bird they have here. You know, you've heard of kiwis, those flightless birds. Well, a Weka is another flightless bird. It's an acronym for the Waikato Environment for Knowledge Analysis. And we conceived of this as a workbench that would kind of incorporate a number of different machine learning algorithms, including some of ours, and we rewrote a whole bunch of standard algorithms and put them in this workbench and stuck an interactive interface on. And that became used quite a lot internationally by the research community, still used a lot for research. A lot of research papers in applied machine learning or data mining use Weka to do their experiments and publish their results, you know. But also, I guess, as the world moved on and people became more interested in data mining, not just in computer science, then it turned out that Weka was an ideal kind of tool for anyone, kind of an end user tool for people who want to mess around with their own data. So it's sort of, it's the same interface, but the application has kind of become much broader than we ever envisaged at the beginning.
I see. So you're saying that initially Weka was adopted by researchers working with data for their analyses, and it's still being used, it's still popular in the research community today? Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
In fact, it was originally adopted by computer science researchers, but now people in all sorts of disciplines, you know, biology and economics and any kind of discipline, anyone with data, you know, needs to know about data mining. So it's become much more broadly applied than we ever envisaged at the beginning. We thought originally it was just for, you know, computer scientists, artificial intelligence experts, machine learning, and so on. But now it's kind of applied everywhere. That's a bit of a surprise, really. We didn't plan any of that.
Sure. No, that's fantastic. In terms of the usage by individuals in whatever private or public organization they're in, do you have a sense for how many people are using Weka and the different ways they're using that?
So the thing about open source software is, you know, you stick it out there and people download it and use it. We don't have a call home facility built into the software. I mean, we could, but we would regard that as being a bit intrusive. So we have no idea who downloads it. I just checked the download statistics this morning. It's been downloaded 4.9 million times. Of course, the same person might have downloaded it several times, you know, so there's not necessarily 4.9 million installations. Well, it certainly isn't, but it's a huge number.
Is there sure, and has it been an increasing rate as well?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's been increasing. The statistics started in the year 2000. and you can kind of look at the graph, and it's just trending upwards. And actually, when we ran the MOOC last year, we got a big spike in downloads then, of course, and we're getting another one at the moment, actually, in this month. So it's definitely trending upwards.
Yeah,
yeah,
Ian,
it's becoming very popular. It's become a very popular tool in, like I say, in all sorts of disciplines. Right. It's really what surprised us.
Right, and certainly you must have some sense of where it's being used just from discussion forums or technical requests or things like that, or people maybe contacting you. What are some of the most interesting applications you've heard about?
Well, here's an intriguing application to do with sex. Let's say you and your partner want a child, but you can't have one. This is a pretty common problem, actually, and it's like fun at first, but it gets a bit frustrating after a while. So artificial insemination works by taking some eggs from the from the woman and fertilizing them with partner or donor sperm, and they grow into embryos, and then you want to plant some embryos. You want to select one or two embryos and plant them back into the womb. And the aim, of course, is to have a live birth, and not too many of them at the same time. So there's an issue of selection of the embryo. There's lots of them you've got, and you need to choose one or two to implant back into the womb. So embryologists actually measure they measure many properties. There's about 60 different properties of embryos, and what you want to do is to choose the ones with the best chance of a successful outcome. And of course, there's historical data on this, right? There's heaps of historical data on what embryos were chosen and what happened in the end and so on. So, I mean, there's a fantastic application area for data mining. Sort of a really nice, morally kind of good, heartwarming kind of application, giving a live birth to a couple who wants a child. How about that? You want to talk about death?
That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. Do you want another example?
Absolutely.
So here's another example to do with death, right? The other end of the spectrum. So I know you don't do this you're in the United States, right? You don't do this in the US. But here in New Zealand, we get a lot of cows, and we feed them on grass. We don't use this corn stuff that you use. We have grass-fed cows, grass all year round. So in the winter, less grass grows, and each farmer has got to make a tough decision about which cows to send to the abattoir and which ones to keep, right? And this is actually a really big economic decision. And let me tell you, you might not have thought about this, but they've got heaps of data on cows. They've got milk yields, every month, and they got the parentage, and they got the kind of birthing history, and they got the shed temperament, whether the cow kicks you when you're trying to milk it, and so on. So, which ones are you going to select to send away, and which ones are you going to keep? Oh, the age, of course, is very important. So there's a tough decision for the farmer to make. And good farmers kind of make these decisions intuitively from the seat of their pants. They kind of look at the herd and decide, and they make good decisions. So one thing you might want to do is educate young farmers in how to make good decisions. So you might use data mining to mine this whole heap of data. We got data in New Zealand on 12 million cows, most of them dead by now, and we can kind of mine that to figure out the factors that good farmers take into account when they make this really important decision, for the purposes not of making the decision automatically, but for the purposes of educating up-and-coming farmers. So there's another example. How about that one?
That's excellent. Yeah, I think that a lot of people are excited about the possibilities of using data to inform decisions like this. One question for you, Ian. For people that are using Weka, do you think it's more common that they're simply replacing some other method of analysis and using Weka because it's more efficient, or are they actually doing analyses that they could not have done or could not have done easily before using Weka?
They're not replacing things, they're doing new stuff. So you got to think about data, right? So in our lifetimes, in the last 20 years really, the biggest thing that's changed about the world is data. You know, we kind of think of our access to information over the internet and how our lives have changed because we have this fantastic fingertip access through Google to anything we ever want to know, you know. But the other side is true as well, that data is being collected about us. Actually, a guy called Edward Snowden is one of our best advocates. You know, he's kind of making the world sensitive to issues about data being collected, what you can learn from data. You know, there's a huge change. They didn't have any of this data 20 years ago. Your supermarket 20 years ago didn't know what you bought. Now with your loyalty card, it's got your entire history of all your purchases that you've ever made at a really fine-grained level of detail. So whatever area you're in, you know, you might be in government or in education or in business, you know, farming, comparing now and 20 years ago, the amount of data you got now is immeasurably larger than what you had before. So this is a whole new phenomenon, and people are just starting to think about it. So it's really important stuff.
I see. Sure. and Ian, I want to get your opinion on how the phrase big data is used today, because it is thrown around quite a bit, and it's almost a talisman, it seems, in some situations. And I've even heard some backlash of people trying to avoid the term or not overuse the term. What do you think? How applicable is it when it is used nowadays?
It's a cool little phrase, isn't it? Big data. You take two kind of really common words, big and data, and you put them together in a way that sounds, you know, it almost sounds ungrammatical, or, you know, the adjective is inapplicable, you know, to the noun. It's kind of intriguing. So I think if you look at the Wikipedia on big data, or you try and find the definition of it, people talk about, you know, the 3 V's. You know, volume, like there's a lot of stuff. Velocity, like it's coming in real fast, and variety, I think that is the other V. A lot of different kind of stuff coming in, and you could also add, you know, verifiability and veracity and a few other V's to this data. So that's the sort of official definition of big data, and people talk about big data as being like, you know, multi dozens of gigabytes at the very small end, up to terabytes or even petabytes at the large end. But when you say kind of big data to an ordinary person, they just think like lots of stuff, you know, and I think it just depends on where you are and what you're doing, what big would be to you, and I think that's fine. So I actually think the phrase big data sort of helps to focus our attention on this change I was just talking about. Things have really changed, and everyone has got what they think of as big data compared to what they had 5 years ago, and certainly 20 years ago. So yeah, I haven't really heard it. Yeah, it's just a phrase, just words, not a big deal, I don't think.
Sure.
Anyway, that's my take on it.
No, absolutely. And Ian, there's another phrase I want to get your take on too. There seems to be this rising new, I guess, role or job description of a data scientist.
Yeah.
I don't know how new it is, but it's certainly becoming more popular. What do you think about that?
It's kind of interesting.
Is that the person that's?
Yeah, it's interesting the way language changes. So, you know, there's statistics, and then there was machine learning, and then there was data mining. People talk about, I've heard it said that data mining is statistics plus marketing. You know, if you can describe what you're doing in a way that grabs people, you're a statistician. Then you call it data mining. And now when we got like so much data, then there's a lot of computational issues about how you handle huge amounts of data that you can't possibly load into main memory and process. So I guess the phrase data scientist is becoming used, you know, to describe someone who knows about all of these different aspects of the problem. But you know, we wrote a book called Data Mining. It's now in its 3rd edition, and it's the basis for this MOOC. When we wrote the book, we didn't know whether to call it. Well, actually, we originally called it machine learning. And the publisher, Elsevier, they are now, it was Morgan Kaufman at the time, they said, you know, you just want to think about the title of this book. They said, where do you want to see it in the bookstore? Do you want to see it down there in the basement in a dusty corner with all the books on artificial intelligence? Or do you want to see it up front near the door with the books on databases? You know, if you call it machine learning, it's going to be kind of categorized as some kind of weird, obscure AI thing. If you call it data mining, then it's going to be like in your face, you know, database kind of stuff. So, well, we chose data mining, and the rest is history. So these little phrases do kind of make a difference, but it's all the same stuff, really. You know, the data scientist is doing today what statisticians did 20 years ago, only, of course, they have immeasurably more stuff to work with.
Right, and I wonder, Ian, if there's a natural tension here between, on the one hand, more sophisticated tools and analyses and statistical methods, machine learning methods that data scientists or others learn, versus the domain expert who might be more of a layperson with regards to a lot of these methods. Are we moving in a direction where this big data is only safe in the hands of very capable, specialized, trained hands, or are we moving in the direction of being able to make this data, easy to manipulate by domain experts, or is this not even the right way to think about the issue?
Very good way to think about it. Very good way to think about it. And I think it's really important that the domain expert, people need to know about the domain to work with data. There's no point in people coming in just knowing about the tools and the techniques. You've got to understand the domain. So those are the people who are going to be able to get kind of results. It's not a case of taking a bunch of data and the data mining algorithm and putting it in a pot and kind of stirring it. You have to really understand from the point of view of the application what you're trying to do and where you're going. So my mission here, if you like, with these MOOCs is to move data mining into the hands of the domain expert, out of the kind of computer scientist, the data scientist, and into the kind of end user. And this is what Weka does. You download Weka, it runs on your PC. You can process data sets with millions, multiple millions of instances and heaps of attributes. It's kind of big stuff, and you can do it yourself, like in your living room, if you like. So I want to get this stuff into the hands of the domain experts. That's where the real application advances are going to come.
How much do the domain experts need to be familiar with the machine learning techniques that are being used and statistics and so on in order to use Weka capably?
They need to do the MOOC. That's what it's for. That's what we're trying to do. So they need a little bit of statistics. They need to understand the principles of the algorithms and different kinds of data representations. There's a lot of, there's a few other MOOCs on data mining, and most other MOOCs focus on the implementation of these algorithms, and they get students to write codes to implement different kinds of machine learning algorithms, which is great. But that's not what we do in the data mining with Weka. I don't think people need to be able to implement the algorithms. They don't need to be able to write that code. They need to understand the principles on which they work. They don't need to understand the dirty details behind the scenes that have to be gotten right to make it all work. So this is kind of what we focus on: the principles of different kinds of representations and different kinds of algorithms, and evaluation. Of course, evaluation is really, really important, and it's very easy to go badly wrong with evaluation. And it's these kind of applied aspects that people need to know. They don't need to know the details of the inner details of how the algorithms work, the kind of dirty stuff down there. So yeah, we try and teach them the right stuff in the MOOC to allow them to apply data mining to their problems. Yeah.
Sure, and that makes sense. But I do wonder: is there a sort of an objection, perhaps by some, who might say that trying to understand conceptually what an algorithm does without understanding the detail of it really can lead people to not really understand the algorithm very well? That you actually need to know the math in some sense in order to truly understand the algorithm. Do people make that argument, and does it have any credence?
Yeah, people make all sorts of arguments, but I mean, you drove your car to work successfully today without knowing about the details of the dirty details of what happens inside that internal combustion engine, and certainly not down to the atomic level. You've got to stop somewhere. So, yeah, people will object maybe, but I think, you can't know everything about these things, and it's important to understand, the limitations of what you're doing. More important to understand the limitations of what's going on and how to evaluate it than to understand those little intricate details. Well, that's what I think anyway.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about how the MOOC started, and who came up with this idea, and how has your experience been having run the first session of it?
A guy called Dave Nichols, a colleague of mine, came up with the idea. He was on sabbatical visiting the University of Maryland, and people kept asking him about Weka, and he doesn't know anything about Weka, actually. He's not on the Weka team, but everyone had heard of Weka. Wherever he went, in fact, everyone had heard of Weka. So, and that was, I can't remember what date that was, like a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. And the MOOCs were just getting popular, so he came back after a sabbatical and said, hey, we should do a MOOC on Weka. And I said, absolutely, let's go for it. So we did. That's how the idea got started. Dave is still involved, actually, in the MOOC. I do the kind of the content stuff, and he does a lot of the sort of social media kind of stuff and the publicity stuff and so on, a lot of the organization. So that's how it started. And I've been giving workshops. And I've been giving workshops on Weka all around the world, over the years. So I had a lot of material on workshop-style material. And it just seemed to gel together. I really like the idea of MOOCs. I think it's a wonderful innovation.
Yeah. And how many participants did you have in your first MOOCs, and what countries were most represented?
Okay, well, it wasn't all that massive, this MOOC. I mean, we're not Coursera, we're not Harvard, we're at the University of Waikato, down in this little country at the bottom end of the world, and we were publicizing it ourselves. We used the Google Course Builder software. So we had 6,500 people registered, of whom 50% didn't touch any of the material, didn't do anything. So that left 3,200 or something. And of those, we issued 1,050 certificates at the end of the day, successful completion certificates. So that's kind of how the numbers went. They came from the United States, was the largest. India was probably the second largest, lots of people from India. Brazil was really big, a lot of people. There's a huge open source movement in Brazil. And New Zealand was up there with a little bit of local interest around here. But we had almost every country, actually. The country we didn't have. We didn't have Turkmenistan, but we did have Afghanistan. We'd Kazakhstan. We had a lot of stuff out there. Yeah, a lot of countries. But the major ones were the four I mentioned: the US, India, Brazil, and New Zealand. I think was probably the fourth.
I see. And how is the MOOC structured? Presumably you're teaching some content, but then are there assignments that are with data sets that you provide, or do people come with their own data sets? How do they do that?
So the MOOC is structured around a succession of 5 to 10 minute videos by me, and after each video is an activity that the student is expected to do or encouraged to do on their computer at home using Weka. Weka is the most wonderful foundation for a MOOC. People download it in the first lesson, and it's kind of Weka is a really fully featured system with huge numbers of algorithms inside. So it's kind of like downloading an entire chemistry laboratory, in your living room for your chemistry MOOC. You've got a complete up-to-date facility that you can just do yourself and do activities that we have carefully planned on data sets that we provide to reinforce the concepts that have been taught in that little video. So it's basically video activity, and the activities are not compulsory. You don't have to do them. In order to get the certificate of completion, you need to do a couple of tests. But we really encourage people to do the activities, because I think that's where people learn, when they're doing stuff, not when I'm telling them about things. So the activities are central
Sure.
to the concept of the MOOC.
And are there opportunities for the students to collaborate through interacting with each other or talking about their own applications which they're trying to pursue?
Yeah, we used a Google infrastructure. We had a Google group for discussions, but in fact, most of the discussions centered pretty directly around the course material. There were some other discussions about, people who are making contact with each other to talk about things offline, but most of the discussion was really kind of question-answer stuff rather than genuine discussion amongst the students. That was fine. That was what we expected.
Sure. And what was the typical profile of the students? Were they working professionals? Were they researchers? Were they students? I'm sure you had some mix of all of them, but
all of the above.
What did you notice?
Ages, we had some people in the 60s and I think maybe even 70s years old. Brackets. So we had a lot of students, a lot of graduate students. I didn't really get a good feel for that. Maybe the average participant was a little bit older than I expected. There weren't a lot of 20 to 25-year-olds, but a lot of people in the 25 to 40, maybe. I don't know. There wasn't anything very striking about those profiles. It was kind of all over the place.
And what did you learn personally from running the MOOC?
Well, I loved it. So what I learned personally is I relearned the joy of having enough time to prepare teaching material. I've been teaching, of course, in the classroom for 40 years. And, the pressure of life, you never have enough time to prepare things properly. And, it's, it's always a bit of a compromise. When you're going out there with a MOOC, it's like it's massive. So there's going to be a lot of people. If you can save everyone a few minutes by spending another day or two yourself on a better activity, then you do it. And it's open. It's part of my record. It's part of the University of Waikato's record. And it's online. The videos are there. They're still there. They're going to be there forever in internet time. Anyway, whenever that ends. So you really kind of have to really focus on making your teaching as good as you can possibly make it, which is an unusual luxury in the world of higher education today. So I really, really love that aspect of it. Also, you're talking to people who can walk out of the room at any time. They can just stop. They can just switch you off. So you really have to work very hard to make sure that you retain people's attention and don't turn them off. It really, there's a lot of it's really interesting to have. It's an interesting challenge to have to do that. Every time you make a video, you think, this might be the one that turns them all off, or every time you do an activity, you think, this might be the one where they all stop, So it really makes you think about these things that you never actually think about in real life as a university teacher. I love that.
I see. So due to the highly leveraged nature of the content you're producing, you have to focus much more on it. It's almost as if it's you're producing the content for almost publication in a sense.
Absolutely, it is publication. It is publication. It's public.
Yeah.
What goes on in my classroom is between me and my students. And I think I'm a pretty good teacher, and I think I try pretty hard. But everyone cuts corners, and you don't always know the answers, or things don't work out the way you hope. Well, here it's all kind of on video, so it's a very different prospect doing something that's so public. And that's a very, very good thing. It's a great pressure for an educator to have. This is the way it should be, I think.
That's a great perspective. So your next session of the MOOC is starting on March 3rd.
Yeah.
How is this next MOOC going to be different, if at all, from the prior one?
Well, the prior one seemed to work pretty well. We had wonderful feedback. So very little is going to change. One thing we're going to try and do is to recruit some tutorial assistants or question answerers from amongst the population of people who completed the first offering of the MOOC. So, we want to try and make this a bit more independent. I mean, it kind of costs money to hire people to answer questions, and I've got to think what's in this for the University of Waikato. Why should they be funding this? The community, if this is a successful experience, then the community should kick in and offer their expertise in helping out with answering questions. So that's one difference. Another difference is, well, we want to make sure that everyone's enrolled in the announce group. There's a Google group for announcements, and some people weren't enrolled in that, so they didn't know what was going on. A few people didn't know what was going on the MOOC because they sort of forgot to enroll in that group. And another difference is that, did you know that we put videos on the Chinese website Youku? In China you can't see YouTube, so we put videos on Youku, and we captioned them in Chinese. We had manually translated captions for all these videos. And so a big change is we're going to make the font size a bit larger for the captions because it was a bit too small. So really not very much is going to change for the second invocation.
Do you have a sense for how many views you got for the Chinese version? We didn't do our publicity well enough in China, and it was a bit of a late addition to the course. We were a little disappointed in the number and the amount of Chinese participation, and we're going to work on that for the next offering of the MOOC. There is one problem that we didn't anticipate, though. This all runs on the Google Course Builder, and it runs in the Google Cloud. And while it's perfectly possible in China to get Gmail addresses, to get yourself a Gmail address, which you need to do this, it's all a bit unreliable, I understand. If you're in China, it's up today, down tomorrow, up the next day kind of thing when you're trying to use the Google infrastructure. So that, unfortunately, is something that I don't think we can do anything about, although we're having a go at that. But so that might be a problem in China that we didn't anticipate, tied to our use of the Google infrastructure. Anyway, we'll see what we can do with China. There are a lot of people out there. And in fact, China has recently overtaken the US as the most popular source of Weka downloads. So China is the largest country for Weka download. A lot of people out there and a lot of data, That's fascinating. And tell me about the follow-on MOOC that you have planned, the more data mining with Weka?
Yep.
Is that what it's called? The one that's starting in late April, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, more data mining with Weka is it's more of the same. It's the same kind of structure. It's the same software, but you're going to learn more advanced things. So, for example, in the first week, we're going to talk about big data, actually. Which for us means multi-million, maybe 10 million instance data sets, which you can process on your home computer, no problem, with Weka. We're going to talk about use of Weka in a stream mode where you can have effectively infinite data sets. They're not kind of loaded into memory. You can do all this kind of stuff with Weka. It's kind of advanced usage of Weka. We're going to do that. We're going to do some text mining. We're going to do some large-scale text mining, some text classification. We do a lot of stuff about attribute selection. We just think about this association rule mining, clustering, working with cost models of your problem, learning curves. We're going to do a bunch of those things. So it's going to be the same sort of thing, but more advanced. And it's called more data mining with Weka because that leaves open the future possibility for a third course called Advanced Data Mining with Weka, but I'm not sure if we're going to do that yet.
I see. Ian, one thing I wanted to ask you about, which you touched on briefly before, you mentioned other MOOCs that were on the topic of machine learning. And as you're probably aware, some of those machine learning MOOCs have been some of the first and most popular MOOCs that have been produced with hundreds of thousands of students. I guess, how do you see, first of all, what's your opinion on those MOOCs? I'm not sure how familiar you are with them. What's your opinion on them, and how well does the content there fit with what you have in your MOOC for students that want to learn about machine learning and so forth?
Yeah, I haven't actually done any of those other MOOCs, but I've looked at some of the material, and of course I know people who've done them, and I think they're great. I think the fact that they're big and they were first, that just reflects this change in the nature of our world that I talked about at the beginning. Data is here to stay, and everyone is concerned about it. In terms of the orientation, they do tend to be more on the algorithmic side. I kind of like to think of Weka and my MOOC as just sort of Microsoft Word, really, of data mining. Everyone can use it. Everyone needs to use it, but everyone needs to know about this kind of stuff. Some people might use it a lot, very powerful. Some people might use it a little bit, but it's really all about the usage, not about, the kind of technical stuff that happens behind the scenes. If you're familiar with LaTeX, for example, imagine a LaTeX user who does their documents, apart from a mathematician, using LaTeX. It's very powerful, but it's not for your average user who would use Microsoft Word, say. So it's not actually an analogy I really like, because Microsoft Word, of course, is very commercial, and Weka is open source and so on, but still, it's for everyone, It's for managers, not necessarily people who are doing the data mining, people who need to understand the kinds of things that can be done and sort of what it's like to do it. That's
Sure.
what our MOOC is about, and I think it's a very different focus from other MOOCs on machine learning and data mining, which are very good. We need them both, no question.
And maybe Microsoft Excel would be an even more appropriate parallel, because it's something that has a lot of functionality that you could release, but it's designed for everyday users.
Yeah. You're right. That's a better analogy.
Yeah. Do have a large portion of your students taken these other MOOCs, learning the details of machine learning? Do you get that sense from your participants?
I would guess not. I think we're really aiming for a different kind of audience. I think the data mining MOOCs, the other data mining MOOCs that I know about, are really aimed at computer scientists and people who want to implement this kind of stuff, and we're not. So I would guess that we don't have a lot of overlap, but I don't really know that.
Okay. Let me ask you a broader question now. In terms of the field of data mining, what are some of the leading edge developments or exciting developments that we can look forward to seeing come to fruition in the near term?
You mean exciting, or you mean scary?
How about interesting? So either.
I don't really know. It comes from the application end. The exciting thing for me is to put this power in the hands of the people who know about the applications. And everywhere there's data, there's scope for data mining. So it's not for me to say where it's going to be applied. That's for the people on the MOOC, the people who are learning this stuff. They're the domain experts, and they're the ones who are going to do the applications. So I guess really, I don't really know what the most exciting developments are going to be. I think there's going to be a lot of exciting stuff everywhere. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the word scary. So what would be some examples of applications that might be perceived as scary to some?
Well, we're all thinking of what those intelligence agencies can find out about our daily lives, what they can leak to our wives about, our illicit activities, all sorts of things that could be pretty scary. I prefer not to think about that kind of thing. It's like any technology. It can be used for good or it can be used for bad, and there's plenty of opportunities for bad uses of data mining, I think, and that's what I'm not going to think about, yes.
Well, as people are working with big data and thinking about all kinds of variables and attributes and so forth, are there ethical decisions, and are there ethical considerations that they need to think about? Are these things that people talk about encountering?
Absolutely. It's in the MOOC, as a matter of fact. I expect you'll find that our MOOC is the only one which explicitly addresses ethical issues. It's the only data mining MOOC that does talk about the question of ethics. I think that's extremely important. And when you give people powerful tools, you need to make them aware of some of the issues that are involved in applying these tools. And I like to think that's something unusual about this MOOC. We do address that question. There are no kind of big answers here, but we at least raise the issue about data and some different international perspectives in different countries about what you can do with data you've collected. You know, what you can do in the United States is with data you've collected is very different from what you can do, say, in a European, particularly a Scandinavian country, where there are much more data protection laws in force. So that is something that's touched upon in the MOOC, and I think that's very important, yes.
I see. Okay. And then I guess in terms of the future of Weka, how much is it being developed and refined, and what are the future plans for it?
Well, Weka's got an absolutely unparalleled capability in terms of different machine learning algorithms. For example, there's another popular system called R, a data mining system. It's kind of more oriented towards computer scientists and involves programming. But so there's now a package in Weka that allows people to access all of the R classification algorithms from the Weka interface. Weka's actually now got a system of packages where you can kind of write independent packages that kind of Weka sort of loads in. So there's an R package, and there's a package on time series analysis, for example, algorithms for data mining of temporal kind of sequences. And there's a package for using Hadoop, which is a technical infrastructure for big data, I guess, and that's a Weka package. So the development of Weka now is mostly through the development of new kind of packages in different kind of areas. Weka really does have an incredible functionality. And the great thing about Weka is it doesn't crash. Actually, Microsoft Word crashes a lot more than Weka does, in my experience. It's very reliable. It's been around for a long time. It's really high-quality software. So we didn't have any issues in the MOOC about people having problems with the software. You know, it's really good, and it's going to develop through the addition of packages tailored for different kinds of applications, I would guess. The development is really out of my hands. I mean, I started this project 20-some years ago, but we don't really do a lot of Weka development around here now. You know, the world has contributed to Weka, and development is proceeding independently of the University of Waikato. We started it, but and we're still involved. But a lot of other people are working with Weka and adding to it and increasing its functionality. It's really cool.
I see. And so as new machine learning algorithms become developed, the open source community is incorporating those to be able to be utilized in Weka. Is that the case?
Yeah, that's why we've created this kind of package mechanism. Sometimes people want to put stuff in Weka that we maybe think shouldn't be there, or we don't think too highly of. So we can kind of divorce ourselves from that by having the separate packages. Anyone can create packages for Weka now, and then people who download Weka can choose what packages they want to download. So I think, yes, that's the way development is going.
Okay. And when students finish taking your MOOC, and maybe they take the more data mining MOOC, and maybe in the future an advanced data mining MOOC, what's the best way for them to keep up with advances in machine learning so that they can continue to use the best algorithms in Weka and so forth? What are the resources for them?
Well, I don't know really. Things don't change that fast, you know. So I think if you were to do those MOOCs, that would really equip you for quite a bit. But in order to keep professional development, well, I think you should just keep tuned to the University of Waikato MOOC channel. We'll be doing more stuff, you know. I don't know what we're going to do, but we're up there, right?
Sure. Sure. And I noticed you have a blog as well where you
yeah, associated with MOOC, there's various
announcements.
stuff. Absolutely, a Twitter feed and things like that. Yeah.
Sure. Now, Ian, one final question for you, and I think it kind of goes back full circle to one of the first things we talked about in terms of this balance between expertise of the methods and accessibility for the domain experts, and that is, do you have concerns, or how much concern do you have that you know, despite all your best efforts to teach properly and so forth, that some portion of people are you know, basically you know, wielding a very powerful Weka, but are not really able to do analyses properly or thoroughly? Is there some danger that you're kind of arming, you know, some group of folks to, you know, sort of mismanage their analysis of data?
Yeah, absolutely.
How much concern is there?
It's happened already quite a bit in the research community. So we see a lot of papers on machine learning where people have downloaded Weka and they got a data set and they've done a whole bunch of kind of runs of different algorithms and come to some pretty flaky conclusions about that and publish this as a paper in some perhaps less reputable academic journal. You know, this happens a lot. People are looking to do research in this area, and you can download Weka and do something you might really consider, you might think of as research, but isn't really contributing in any way to science. So you might say that we've enabled some more pollution of the kind of academic space by making this tool available to people who we prefer weren't using it. I mean, that's life, really. I don't lose any sleep over that. It's a little bit unfortunate, perhaps, but I prefer to think of the people who were enabling to do new things that they would never have been able to do before, and using you know, Weka for more useful kind of purposes. Yeah, sure, that's a problem. Yeah. If you do anything in life, you know. And carry on, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. With tools, they can be used for good or ill, as you mentioned. And that did remind me of another question I wanted to ask you, and that is, you know, sometimes people approach data and they feel that it is methodologically imperative that they approach data with certain a priori research questions or hypotheses, and then investigate the data to test that, while others you know, want to just go in and explore the data and see what kind of pops out. Do you have a stance on this, or does it depend?
Well, one thing you learn if you do the data mining with Weka MOOC is that you need to be pretty clear what question you're asking when you start analyzing data. It's not usually very productive just to go in and just, here's a bunch of data, let's kind of look and see if we can find anything interesting in it. Well, there might be lots of interesting, but maybe not very useful things. It's much more productive, I think, to come along with a question that you're trying to answer. So a large part of the data mining problem is coming up with a question that you're asking and kind of refining that question. Once you're clear about what it is you're trying to do, then the technical aspect of, you know, using Weka to do some data mining and doing some evaluation and so on, that's actually the easy part. I think the hard part is always asking the questions. So yeah, I'm very much, you know, think about your domain, think about the questions you're asking, what do you really want to know, rather than let's dive in and start playing around with this data.
Sure, that makes sense. I think that approach is, it sounds like the right approach, but it also does seem like sometimes it's a chicken and egg problem in that you're not always sure what questions it is possible to ask given a specific data set until you're familiar. You may not really know the data well enough to know what's possible to ask of it. Is that the case sometimes?
True. One of the things we say is you've got to get down and dirty with your data. You know, you've got to get in and look at your data, understand what it's doing, and have a look at it from different points of view, and get right down there and look at individual data points and what they mean, and what's behind them, and so on. Yeah, getting acquainted with the data is very important, and Weka contains some pretty cool visualization tools to help you do that kind of thing. So yeah, it's certainly important to kind of look around your data and kind of explore it. But when it comes right down to doing something, then you really need to have a question in mind, I think. And formulating that, yeah, it might involve some exploration and so on. It's not easy. Asking the questions is always the hard part in life. The answers tend to be easy. We've got Google for that.
Sure. That's the art part of the art and the science mixture, right? Okay. Thank you, Ian Witten. Those are all the questions that I had. Was there anything else that we didn't cover about data mining, about Weka, about the MOOC that you wanted to mention before we concluded?
I think you've got enough.
Absolutely. I appreciate your time. This has been very enjoyable hearing about Weka and the MOOC. And just to recap, I'm speaking with Professor Ian Witten of the University of Waikato about talking about the upcoming MOOC, Data Mining with Weka, that starts on March 3rd. Thank you very much, Professor. I appreciate your time.
Sure. Great to talk to you.
Thanks.
See you, Charlie. Bye.
Nice talking to you. Take care. Bye-bye.